Hello, welcome. In this video, I have the new Ethereal Eyes eyeshadow palette by Makeup by Mario. Very exciting launch. Sorry about that. I think I just dropped it on my mic. The Anastasia palette with Makeup by Mario from forever ago was one of my first big girl eyeshadow palette purchases. So this is pretty nostalgic for me. I have some small pans in these, but overall I think this about makeup artist lines in general, but I feel like they're really good at picking color stories that are just really easy to work with and make beautiful looks and feel effortless. On top of that, I do think the formulation of this palette is quite nice. I had a lot of interest in his past two eyeshadow palettes as well. I know he also has those quads. The matte one I was super interested in, but I also have the Vizier neutral mattes, and I thought that was kind of redundant. But this one, you know, though it is a neutral palette, do I have things that could maybe make this look in my collection? Sure, but this is really pretty and it's so right up my alley. It's slightly unique in that it's like similar to a lot of things, but still kind of holds its own as far as what's in my collection. But the formulations, I'm all quite happy with. The colors, they're just nice. Okay, it's $68, which is quite pricey for 12 shades. The packaging feels very hefty, pretty like well worth the pricing. Like it feels kind of luxurious. It's got this nice soft matte white metal finish, and I really like the size of this palette. It just feels like they packed a lot. Like it feels spacious. These shadows feel big, the mirror feels big, but at the same time when I close it, it feels like relatively compact. I think I'm gonna travel with this. I was gonna bring like a few singles and a quad. I'm going on a trip, but I think I'm gonna bring this one instead because I just feel like it's really nice for most everyday looks that I could possibly want. The topper shades are pretty up my alley and kind of make some of the singles that I wanted to bring redundant. So let's get into the shades. I think that they are quite neutral, quite user-friendly. It leans a little light, in my opinion, particularly because the deeper shades are quite subtle / easy to blend out, so they don't have the most impact. Overall, the whole thing feels pretty like dainty and easy to pop on in my experience. Let me hold this up against my other current neutral palette that I love and reach for and recommend, which is the Natasha Denona Glam palette. This palette definitely leans quite cool, but they're kind of, you know, they have a few overlaps. They both have things that I think could work for everyone. Overall, the Makeup by Mario one is a bit rosier and a bit warmer, which I think is quite on trend and will work for a lot of people. I know some people might think that the Glam one is too cool, whereas this is kind of just like right in between. I just feel like a lot of people would think that this is very user-friendly. Here are the shades swatched out. The names are all like EE1 through 12, based on where they are in the palette, so not super descript. I was worried that the shimmers here would feel a little redundant. They are described as like a translucent glossy finish, which I agree. They are swatched out. They look kind of similar, and I tested them on my eyes individually. So on this eye, I'm gonna go in with this lightest shade. So this one was on this eye, and then I'm going in with the shade in the middle of the second row, which on this finger, on this eye. So you can definitely see a difference. The This one is definitely more of a light champagne, and this one has a little bit more of like a cooler reflect, but like a warm base pigment behind it. I prefer this one. I think it's got like a more in-depth kind of wet look to it. Okay, now I'm gonna compare again the lightest shimmery shade on my right eye with the third shimmery shade, which is the more golden one on this eye. See, now these are getting to be quite similar. This one's brighter, but just between the three, I'm not convinced that I like having all of them, but they give a pretty similar effect. Let me know what you think. They still look kind of similar. But they're all really pretty. They're all shades that I would easily be drawn to, so I'm not too mad. I think that this shimmery gold shade is really pretty because I happen to have a lot of like shimmery golds in my collection, and they all lean a little too like yellow gold or like bright, whereas this one is quite subdued. And I think it has a really, really pretty effect. The one that I think like could be replaced in this palette is this lightest shimmery shade. I think they could have done maybe something else with it, just because between these other shades that are pretty similar to it, maybe there's room for something different, but that's okay. On the topic of toppers, I think some standout ones to mention alongside it are Space Cowboy by Urban Decay. Here we are for that like center shade, EE6. I think it's quite similar. So here's the shade in question. And then right below that, I'm gonna swatch Space Cowboy. They're pretty darn similar, and Space Cowboy is like one of my favorite shades. Space Cowboy has probably like a smoother amount of glittery pigments and a very similar, maybe lighter base pigment behind it, but they both have like a little bit of a warmish base pigment. This one from Makeup by Mario leans a little rosy pink too, so that's really pretty. Other topper formulas that I think are worth mentioning next to it are the Charlotte Tilbury Pop colors. So this is the one from Exaggerize. I'll just go ahead and continue to swatch it in this general area alongside them. They all have pretty similar effects and maybe slight differences. The Makeup by Mario one is very, very soft and smooth and a little bit flecky and flaky, whereas like the Space Cowboy and the Charlotte Tilbury one, they're smoother and thinner and go really thin and like flat on your eyelids. So essentially there's not much fallout or anything. And then this one is this very white, bright, light special shade from the Midnight Sun Pat McGrath palette. And as you can see, Pat McGrath is still like the shiniest as far as glimmery special shades, but the Makeup by Mario ones definitely hold their own, and they give a very, very pretty effect on the eyelids that are easy to work with. I definitely think a lot of people would like this. So today my eye look came together pretty easily. I'll just show you how I did it. Okay, so I was messing around with some of the shimmery shades on my eyelids already, so it's kind of a glittery mess if you look close, but nevertheless, let's press on. So to start, I'm just gonna go in with the lightest shade, the latest matte shade, and pop that all over both of my eyelids. See, I'm gonna go in with this pinky sort of shade and put this mostly all over the lid, but try not to blow it out too much. I'm gonna do a little bit of a winged shape. I'm gonna use this cool shade to kind of blend the edges of that. Okay, smaller brush into this deeper, more neutral, medium deep, more neutral brown. And start tapping that into my outer corner. As you can see, despite it being like a pretty decently deep brown, it builds up very gently. I've tried this out a few times, and this has been my general experience, is that the darker shades are just very easy to work with. They kind of blend and blur themselves out, and I never find myself with harsh lines, and that is a really nice feature. I'm gonna go in with a little bit of this darkest matte shade and just deepen that up even more. Okay, now I want to mess around with these two like non-top coat but shimmery shades. So I'm gonna take this silvery one and put that in the center of my lower lash lid, lower lash line. I feel like this brush might not be the best. Let's try with the finger. Oh yeah, that's more satisfying. This nice metallic chocolatey brown in the outer corner of my lower lash line. Okay, and then I'm gonna use this topper shade on just the center of both my eyelids. I have a noticeable amount of fallout on my face, both glitter and some of the matte shadows. It's certainly not the worst. I think Pat McGrath is one of the most frustrating formulations as far as the amount of fallout I have. This is somewhere in the middle, but it definitely exists. So the formulation throughout this palette is quite soft and buttery, but not uber pigmented, whereas like, you know, a few years ago, it was very popular to be very, very soft and pigmented and buttery, all of these things, and like swatch really, really high impact. And then I feel like, personally, I started to veer more towards like sheerer-ish eyeshadow formulations that are more harder packed, so like less picks up on the brush at once. But here we have something that I feel like is soft to work with. So there is fallout, but it is not super, like it kind of blurs itself out as it goes on. And I notice this the most with these deeper shades. I often, especially with this e.l.f. brush that I use today, have this issue where like, I don't know, it can just kind of clump together at once and I have a hard time blending and letting everything diffuse out. It's probably just me and my skills, but in any case, this palette made it really, really easy. Like I feel like everything is so soft and diffused, and like these browns are all quite deep on my skin tone at least, or typically a color like this would look pretty intense. Like whereas with my Natasha Denona or Pat McGrath formulations, I would have to make sure to tap like the lightest amount in and blend it out very carefully. So it's really nice knowing that I have this option. This palette is one of the most expensive palettes that I purchased with my own money. I usually wait till like a pretty significant sale. So this one being that, well, I'm not Rouge, so I got 10% off, but even there, it's still above $60, which is kind of a lot. These shimmers, especially these four, I think apply much better with a finger. Everything else works fine with a brush. I'm realizing now that I should have shown the swatches under sunlight, because the shimmery glossy shades look so good when reflecting the sunlight. It looks so bright and glimmery and glittery, and I don't know if it's gonna pick up on camera, but like I'm looking at myself in the mirror with the sunlight reflecting, and it's like there's literally little flecks of light dancing all over my eyelids, and it looks really, really stunning. It's so like dainty and pretty. I also think that this picks up really impressively in low light settings as well, and looked really good on like my iPhone camera as far as things go. I just keep like catching myself with the shimmery topper shades in different lighting situations, and I'm more and more impressed. Whether or not this product is worth it for you at its price point can definitely vary, but for me, I feel like it's a lot of things that I happen to love from eyeshadows all packed in one. Like if you could make a baby out of the Natasha Denona Glam and like the Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk, as well as stick in some of my favorite like glimmery, sheer, wet look shadow toppers, you would get the Makeup by Mario palette. So I'm definitely impressed. When I first saw pictures online, I thought it might be a little bit warm for me, but it's mostly just this one that really screams warm. Like in person, overall I think things are quite neutral, which I love. And like this kind of silvery pewter shade, love the inclusion of that. I'm gonna be away for a while, and I think that with this being my only palette, I am not gonna miss anything else from my collection. And that's really exciting to me. So let me know what you think. If you have any other questions, I'll be able to do a much more in-depth review later on. So thank you so much for watching, and from my research there are quite a handful of new eyeshadow launches coming up this month that I'm very excited for, so I hope you stay tuned for those.